Hey there, how there, ho there, Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video. Today, as I rock the powder blue of the Toronto Blue Jays and hope that they win the World Series this year, 2026. They should have won 2025. You don't blow a 3-run lead in Game 7. Although it's not the first time. The 1986 Red Sox did that too. But anyhow, we're looking at the top 10 of all time. That, to everyone, means a choke. So, what defines a choke? Well, in my video, it's either a one-game choke or a massive choke of a team and all that. There are a few times that you will see it and all that. So, yeah, that's the thing is. Yeah, so anyway, that is what happened. So, as I am doing my research and all that, I'm rudely interrupted by Microsoft Copilot. Anyway, doesn't matter. So let's talk about the top 10 MLB chokes of all time. And yes, the Blue Jays are in it twice. In fact, the Blue Jays are both number 10 and number 9. First off, number 10 is the 2025 Jays. Fight me on this. Well, to be fair, the Blue Jays only won 74 games in the 2024 season, and everyone thought, oh, well, 2025 will be a wash. But then somehow, in some way, they put up 20 more wins than they did previous year. 94 wins and snuck past the Yankees to win the AL East on tiebreak, head-to-head tiebreak. So the Jays got to have the bye to go to the League Division Series, and when you know it, our pesky friends, the New York Yankees, would be waiting in the wings. The Blue Jays used Vladdy Guerrero's massive job in games 1 and 2 to take out the Yankees in 4 games. Then in the ALCS against the Mariners, who were fresh off a 15-inning fest against Detroit, the Jays couldn't completely take advantage of the Mariners. They were down 2-0, won 2 games in Seattle, and then lost game 5, and then had to win both 6 and 7 on home turf. But fortunately for the Jays, they did so, especially George Springer's massive home run in game 7, excuse me. They went to the World Series against the Dodgers. Everyone thought the Dodgers were going to roll over the Blue Jays, but the Jays were up 3-2, lost game 6. Well, you can't blame them. I mean, it was a tight pitching matchup, and that ball by half an inch. If it was half an inch any direction, that ball would have been loose, and the Jays probably would have scored the second run at the very least. But of course, Game 7, Jays were up 3-0. Bo Bichette with his home run to center field. It was shocking. He hit it off Ohtani and proved that Ohtani was human after all. Jays were up 4-2, and then the Dodgers hit a home run in the 8th off Savage, and then 9th inning, Miguel Rojas, of all freaking people, with a home run off Jeff Hoffman, and the Dodgers got a home run by Will Smith, not the Fresh Prince. But anyway, he had a home run, and the Jays lost the World Series. I mean, the bottom of the ninth, they had a chance. A sac fly would have won the game, but they failed. And it still pisses me off to this day. I know it's like too soon, but dude, it's been 4 months. Give me 2 more months. Number 9 is the 1987 Blue Jays. People forget about the 1987 Blue Jays when they talk about choke jobs. The Blue Jays in 1987 were up and down like a freaking roller coaster, or the stock market, if you will. The 87 Blue Jays were looking good. They were first in the AL East with a week and a bit to go. They faced the Detroit Tigers on home turf in a famous 3-game series. The Saturday game was broadcast on NBC for a game of the week, in which saw Rick Leach become the hero with a big double to score the Blue Jays to win 10-9, and the Jays were looking pretty good. They were up by 4.5 games on the Tigers. And then on Sunday, because the NFL was on strike at the time, NBC got to host the Sunday event too. And the Jays were up in the 9th. All they needed to do was hold the Tigers, and they would be 5.5 up. But Hanky blew the save. The Tigers won extra innings. No problem. The Jays were up by 3.5 with 7 games to play. The Blue Jays would face the Milwaukee Brewers. Unfortunately, though, they got swept by the Brewers, who were actually looking pretty good to start the AL East season when one Nieves throwing the no hitter in that, their 13-game winning streak. What's worse is the Blue Jays had injury woes. Ernie Witt was trying to break up a double play, and he got hurt in the ribs. Bill Madlock of the Tigers took out Tony Fernandez with a hard slide in that Toronto-Detroit series in Toronto, and Fernandez basically took his ball and walked away. While Witt was getting painful injections. Anyway, the Blue Jays and Tigers, long story short, the Jays were up by 2 games to move on. We're up by 1. The Jays needed to win 2 out of 3 to clinch the division. They win 1 out of 3 in Detroit. That forces 1-game playoff, which I bet was in Toronto. And, well, the Jays, the only way the Tigers could win the division is by sweeping them. That's what happened. The Blue Jays lost game 1 on the Friday, then the Saturday in front of the NBC cameras. Mike Flanagan went toe-to-toe with Doyle Alexander, or was it Jack Morris? I can't remember. But anyhow, that didn't work out well. The Blue Jays lost on a ground ball right through Manny Lee's legs. And the Blue Jays lost that game. The Jays had to win on Sunday on ABC's Sunday afternoon baseball. Unfortunately for the Blue Jays, they lost 1-0 as Frank Tanana basically took out the Blue Jays' bats. George Bell, even though he won MVP, was just a ghost in the final few weeks. If the Blue Jays had just won 1 or 2 games, they would have won the AL East. Maybe beat the Twins in the World Series, probably lose the World Series. I don't know what would have happened. Anyway, number 8 is the final week fumble of the 2012 Texas Rangers. Just as bad as the Blue Jays, the Rangers fumbled in their final week. They actually were looking good. They were going from pillar to post for the AAL West, and all they needed to do was stay calm. After all, they did go to the past 2 World Series. So the Rangers were looking good. In their last 6 games, they lost 5 of them. Well, at least they did better than the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays lost their last 7. Nevertheless, the Rangers blew the AL West. Oakland snuck in, and Oakland were playing Texas head-to-head in Oakland on the final weekend. Texas did get another chance. They played the wild card game, in which the Major League Baseball said the top 5 teams in each league would make the playoffs, not 4. Texas would lose the wild card game. I think it was to Tampa, but anyway, yeah, Texas fumbled the wild card game, so they didn't even get the wild card. Number 7 is the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1951. Now, we all know about the shot heard around the world and all that. But Brooklyn actually were up by 13.5 games. But the Giants caught them. And all that. So that was kind of pathetic. In a way. So, yeah, Brooklyn did all that. They were up by 13.5 in August. But then the Giants started to have a massive swing. Brooklyn wasn't half bad. They were decent during the last month and a half. But the Giants caught them on the final day, forced a 3-game playoff. The National League went with a 3-game playoff between the Giants and the Dodgers. The Dodgers won the coin flip and decided to play Game 1 at home and have Games 2 and 3 at the Polo Grounds. They could have easily called it and said they would play on the road to start, meaning that they would get Games 2 and 3. But they failed. Brooklyn lost the game thanks to a Bobby Thompson home run, but it wasn't the game winner, I don't think. Brooklyn used Clem Labine to get the win at the Polo Grounds in Game 2, but Game 3, Don Newcombe pitched his heart out. He pitched too many innings leading up to this game. The Dodgers made some key defensive mistakes, and then Bobby Thompson, with 2 runners on, lifted one to left field, which was very shallow. Polo Grounds was very shallow. And as Russ Hodges says, the Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. Bobby Thompson did it. Russ Hodges is a hero. A lot of people forget that that recording could not exist without a fan who was a Dodgers fan who wanted to see Russ Hodges cry about the Giants. But the fan named Rube Goldberg, or whatever his name, Lawrence Goldberg, decided to give it to Russ Hodges, saying, you got to have this. And then he got cigarettes in return. But yeah, the shot heard around the world was big. The Giants would go on to fumble in the final against the Yankees. So the Dodgers had some kind of revenge. And also in 2001, a Giants backup catcher named Sal Yevers said that, the Giants did kind of cheat at the Polo Grounds because they used a high powered telescope and all that, and a cheating system akin to the Astros. Now, let's not forget that, yes, that happened, but let's not also forget that the Giants actually were 22-7 in a 29 game stretch away from the Polo Grounds. So they were better in that stretch away from the Polo Grounds. So the cheating kind of helped, but, they also won so many games on the road. Number 6 is the 1978 Boston Red Sox. Speaking of choke jobs by 13 or more games, the Boston Red Sox in 1978 had a massive swoon. Boston looked pretty good out of the gate. Yaz was leading them. Don Zimmer, as manager, was helping out, and Boston looked pretty good. But then the Yankees came roaring. In September, they played a 4 game set at Fenway Park, and the Yankees demolished the Red Sox so much so they called it the Second Boston Massacre. Boston lost their 14 game lead. Well, Butch Hobson was still playing third base despite having bone chips in his elbow and him having to rub his elbow every inning. He was terrible. He had one of the worst fielding seasons by a third baseman past 1950. The pitchers were not used that well. Bobby Sproul was used to try to stink up the Yankees, but that failed. And Bill Lee was hurt too. And also Don Zimmer didn't trust Bill Lee a lot, not even in the bullpen. So, yeah, Boston looked back. The Yankees took the lead in the division, but what people forget is that the Yankees lost on the final day and the Red Sox won on the final day against my Blue Jays and tied it. And Boston got to host a 1 game playoff. The American League did best of 1. The National League, I think, was best of 3 until they turned to 1. But anyway, ABC with Keith Jackson calling the game. The Red Sox looked good. Mike Torres was pitching the game of his life. Strange as it sounds, he helped the Yankees win the 77 World Series, and then Boston got him in 1978. But then this guy named Bucky Dent, who only had 5 home runs in the season, he was late hitting. He was terrible. His bat even grabbed, and then he had to get trainers after he fouled a ball off his leg. Somehow, Bucky flew it over the left field green monster. It was gone. The Yankees were up 3-2. Contrary to popular belief, that did not win the Yankees the game per se, because Reggie Jackson hit a home run to make it 5-3 in the 8th, and that was the winning margin. It was 5-4. And the Red Sox, of course, didn't have the benefit of the wild card. But yeah, Boston really choked that one. Speaking of the Red Sox, they're number 5, the 1986 Red Sox in Game 6 of the World Series. This is the only 1 game choke you'll see. Anyhow, the Red Sox were big. Roger Clemens was coming along. He had that 20 strikeout game. Bill Buckner with over 100 RBIs in the season. The hitting of Dave Henderson. Don Baylor was on the team. Boston looked at Calvin Schiraldi. They looked good. They were actually nearly about to choke. The Angels were up 3 games to 1 and were a strike away from knocking out the Red Sox in Game 5 of the ALCS. Donnie Moore threw a bad pitch to Dave Henderson. He had the 2-run home run to give Boston the lead. California tied the game, but then Boston won on a sac fly in the 11th by Hendu. The Red Sox had to win both 6 and 7 at home. That's what people forget about the Angels and all that. In 1986 is that the Red Sox still had to win Game 6 and 7. And they did. Red Sox took a 2-0 lead on the insurmountable Mets, but then lost 2 out of 3 at home. They were still up 3 games to 2, and then Game 6 happened. The Red Sox looked decent. That parachutist, Michael Sergio, ruining Buckner's concentration. Boston, the Mets had to go to extras, in which Dave Henderson again hit a home run in extra innings. Red Sox scored another run to make it 5-3, and all Boston needed to do was get 3 outs. They got the first 2 for Gary Carter came up, and there were singles galore, and then Bob Stanley threw that wild pitch that scored the tying run, and then Mookie Wilson hit the slow roller up the line. Bill Buckner, when he was healthy, he could get it easily, stump on first base, and take it to the 11th. But no, the ball went right through his legs and all that. Terribly, the Mets won the Game 6-5. They would win Game 7 as the Red Sox choked a 3-run lead in Game 7. People probably forgot about that. But the fact is that, Buckner's infamous error was huge. The worst part was John McNamara wanted Buckner on the field, even though Buckner had terrible legs. His hamstrings were torn and all that. He had cartilage things. He had to wear high tops. And Dave Stapleton was used as a defensive replacement when the Red Sox were going to win the game, and that worked out. But no, where was Stapleton? I don't know. Anyway, number 4 is the 95 California Angels, a late season free fall. So the Angels looked decent. The 94 season, of course, was strike shorted. But what's worse is that it actually worked out for the AL West because who led the AL West? The Texas Rangers. And how many games were they up by? Probably 2.5 up on California, Oakland, and Seattle combined. And the fact is, what was Texas's record? A pathetic 10 games below 500. So the Texas Rangers would have won the AL West with one of the worst records ever by a playoff team. But in 95, the Angels looked better. They looked strong. Seattle was faltering because Ken Griffey Jr. injured himself running into a wall. And then, when Ken Griffey came back, Seattle started strong. The Angels had an 11-game lead. They were victimized by Cal Ripken's 2-1, 3-1 game in which, Ripken set the record for most consecutive games and hit a home run to boot. The Angels were falling flat. They were 12-27. But the good news, if you're an Angels fan, was that it was not to end their season. The Angels did win their last game. Seattle lost their last game. So the Angels played Seattle in a 1-game playoff in Seattle. Seattle used Randy Johnson. They had to. It was 1-game playoff. And people didn't realize at the time and forget that Seattle was on the verge of losing their franchise because they were playing in the Kingdom, which was cavernous. They didn't go through ownership that well. They were about to leave maybe for Tampa Bay. But the 1-game playoff, Randy Johnson and the Mariners won 9-1, and Soho had the Little League home run, if you call it that. Seattle went into New York and lost the first 2 games of the League Division Series thanks to them not having Randy Johnson because of his pitching in the 1-game wildcard. Jim Leyritz won in the 15th inning of Game 2, and then Seattle went on a bender. 3 straight wins. Randy pitched Game 3. Game 4, Edgar Martinez proved how good he was by hitting a pair of home runs, including a grand slam off John Wetland in the 8th. The 4th of Game 5, it was best of 5, remember. Seattle was down by a few runs. Ken Griffey Jr., bottom of the 8th, hit a home run to right field, his 5th home run in that series, tying a record set by Reggie. And then, David Cohn was not taken out of the game. He should have been taken out quickly for Mariano Rivera, who was the setup guy. But Buck Showalter froze. And then the Mariners won the LDS thanks to the double by Edgar Martinez. They did lose the ALCS, but baseball was saved in Seattle. They got the referendum. They built a new stadium. Mariners baseball was there, and the Angels faltered again after the 1986 team faltered, the 95 team too. Number 3 is the 2011 Boston Red Sox, and in essence, the 2011 Atlanta Braves, both with September collapses. On Labor Day, Boston and Atlanta were looking good to be the wild card champs. Like Boston knew that the Yankees were going to win the East, and Atlanta knew that Philly was going to win the East. So they did that. What was crazy is that Boston's collapse was worse than Atlanta's in a sense. Boston had a 9-game lead for the AL wild card. They lost on Labor Day on a walk-off home run by, I would like to say Eric Hinsky, but I'm probably wrong. No, I can't remember who it was. But yeah, the Blue Jays walked off the Red Sox on Labor Day with a home run, and that started off a September collapse. Boston would end up being 7-20. Boston still had a chance on the final day to win the AL wildcard. They needed to beat Baltimore because Tampa was lurking too. Tampa needed to beat the Yankees and have Boston lose and all that so that they could get it. Yeah, Boston was tied with Tampa. Boston won. The worst case scenario for Boston was Tampa won and forced a 1-game playoff. Boston had the lead on Baltimore when the rain came. Normally, after like 5.5 innings, you would call the game because it is an official game. But no, they let the game play out because obviously this was for a playoff. Tampa was down 7-0 in their game against the Yankees, and it looked good. But the Yankees decided to go with their bench players and all that, and the Rays came roaring back. They were down by 3 in the 8th, but they tied the game thanks to a Dan Johnson home run that just barely cleared the right field fence in the 9th. Boston collapsed too. They had 1 out to go to win the game 3-2, and then Papelbon threw back-to-back doubles. The Orioles scored to tie the game, and then a fly ball Carl Crawford couldn't make the catch. He had to throw it to the plate, but not in time. Baltimore won the game 4-3. Moments later, after Tampa learned to score, Evan Longoria in the 12th hit a home run over the left field fence, just over the left field wall, and Tampa was in as the AL wildcard, and Boston had to go home. Kind of maybe because of Boston's collapse, they made a rule of making 2 wildcard teams and all that. Number 2 is Philadelphia 1964, called the Fold, PHOLD. Philly was up by 6.5 with 12 games left to win the NL pennant and go to the World Series for the first time in 14 years. Remember, before 1969, if you had to make the World Series, you had to win your league. It was one league, one division, and all that. Despite expansion happening, the 1969 expansion led Major League Baseball to make 2 16 divisions per league, and have those guys play in a championship series to go to the World Series. Phils were up by 6.5 with 12 games left. They basically were printing World Series tickets. Shibe Park was going to be, rocking and all that. Yeah, it was Shibe, wasn't it? Yeah. Unfortunately, Philly screwed up. They lost 10 straight games. They had a game against Cincinnati, which the Cincy guy stole home out of nowhere, and that started the whole fold. Philly couldn't hit. Their pitching sucked, mostly because Gene Mauch, who is a good manager, actually overmanaged. He was scared and put his 2 main guys almost every other start, which, will wear and tear. So when you didn't have a good third or fourth starter, so Mauch was ruining things. He was over managing, kind of like Schottenheimer in the NFL, but the Phils choked. And St. Louis ended up winning the pennant and the World Series in Game 7 against the Yankees. I think the Yankees probably would have taken the Phillies in the World Series in 1964. And number 1 is the 2004 New York Yankees. You knew that was going to happen. You knew I was going to mention the 2004 New York Yankees, huh? Well, I just did. So, the 2004 New York Yankees were looking good in the ALCS against Boston. Up 3 games to none, and they had just crushed the Red Sox 19-7 in Game 3. So it looked like the Yankees were going to crush Boston out of town. Yankees were up 4-3 in the ninth. Mo Rivera on the bump. Dave Roberts was walked. Yes, that Dave Roberts from the Dodgers. And then he bugged Rivera. And then he managed to swipe second base, just getting in under the tag. Euclid with a RBI single to tie the game. And then in the 12th, Big Papi came up, hit one to right field over the fence, and Joe Buck on Fox says, "We'll see you later tonight," because the home run was hit past midnight. So, we went into the following day. So that night, Game 5, Ortiz did it again. He wrapped a single in extra innings. The Red Sox were going back to Yankee Stadium 3 games to 2. Yankees were at home, so no big deal, they thought. Kurt Schilling came in Game 6 with that bloody sock and all that. Pitched Boston to a 4-2 lead. The Yankees did score to make it 4-3, but then A-Rod got in trouble because on a slow grounder, A-Rod decided to swat at Bronson Arroyo's glove, and the ball came loose. But the umpire saw that and didn't award the run. They basically called A-Rod out. Red Sox won Game 6, and then Game 7, Johnny Damon with a pair of home runs, including a grand slam. The Red Sox completed the comeback 10-3 and did it. What's even more crazy was that the Red Sox reverse swept the Yankees, but they swept the Cardinals in the World Series. So that was just impressive how they would do that. 8 straight wins. And even more crazy, this is a personal stat. The Red Sox were 8-0 when I was in Kitchener, in Kitchener. And they went 0-3 when I was in the hospital with appendicitis. My appendix had problems the day of Game 3 of the Red Sox series against the Angels, in which, Big Papi hit the walk-off home run to knock out the Angels and go to the ALCS. I was in the hospital for a few days, then I had to stay at my parents' place to recuperate. The Red Sox were 0-3 in that stretch, and then when I came home healthy enough to go back to Kitchener, then they started winning. Just saying. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond.